All right, this is part 2 of your fish video notes, and these notes are going to pick up right with class Chondrichthyes, the cartilaginous fish. So let's break down the name first. Chondro itself is cartilage, ichthyes is fish. So these are things like sharks, skates, rays, catfish, and they can, or ratfish, sorry, and they can be carnivores or scavengers. They are also mostly marine. They do have biting mouthparts, paired appendages, and placoid scales, which is why, if you've ever touched a shark before, they have that sandpaper texture, but it really helps them reduce drag as they swim. They also have a cartilaginous endoskeleton. So the first subclass we're going to discuss is Elasmobranchii. Now let's break this name down as well. So this name is elasmos is plate metal and branchia is gills. So sharks, skates, and rays are all in this subclass, and there's actually 820 species. And they, once again, have those placoid scales, which gives that sandpaper feeling. Here's just an example of some of the diversity of the species. And they also have shark teeth. I'm sure you're very aware of shark teeth and how they are, and they lose them, and you can find them sometimes. So shark teeth are actually modified placoid scales. And they have rows of teeth. So if you see in this picture down here, you see all the rows of teeth. So as they wear out their outer teeth, those just fall out and the inside teeth move in to replace them. So the largest living shark then, as you can probably guess, is the whale shark. And you've probably seen this at the aquarium. They are filter feeders, so those are those pharyngeal arches that are modified to strain plankton and filter feed. So there's a picture of a whale shark. So let's talk about the most feared shark, the fiercest shark. As I'm sure you guessed, the great white shark is the most feared, and it is the fiercest shark. Within subclass Elasmobranchii, we also have the skates and rays. So these are the ones that live on the ocean floor. They're in shallow waters. They have wing-like appendages, and they're also very good at camouflaging into the sand. Within this, we also have ratfish. So they're actually their own subclass, holocephali. Holo meaning whole, cephal, head. So they look, I guess, kind of like a rat, but they're a fish. They actually don't have scales. And their gills are covered with an operculum, which is very similar to fish, not necessarily sharks. They do have, though, teeth that are large plates for crushing, and their skeleton's made of cartilage, which is why they're in class Chondrichthyes. Now into class Osteichthyes, and this is where we'll spend a majority of our notes and our time, is talking about the bony fish. So first of all, osteo, bone, ichthyes, fish. So Osteichthyes are the bony fish, Chondrichthyes are the cartilaginous, and I just think C for Chondrichthyes, C for cartilage. So they do have bones in their skeleton and or their scales, depending on the fish, and they have something called a bony operculum, which is covering their gill openings. Sharks don't have this. They also have something called a swim bladder, or they can have lungs to breathe. The first subclass then within Osteichthyes is Sarcopterygii. Now, sacro meaning flesh, pteryx meaning fin. So they actually have these muscular lobes that are their fins, and that's what separates them from some of the other bony fish. And they use lungs in their gas exchange, which is pretty neat for living underwater. So they do live in regions of common seasonal drought, and they use those lungs to breathe then when the water dries up. So this is a huge evolutionary advantage for these lungfish because it helps them survive those different environmental factors they're going to come across. A fish you might have heard about is called a coelacanth. Now, these are also in this same subclass, and they were actually originally thought to be extinct until 1938, which one was found in South Africa. Interestingly enough, in 1977, there was actually another new species found off the coast of Indonesia of these fish. There's another fish in this subclass that is extinct, but it is related to the two that we just discussed. So these are the osteolepiforms, and they're actually believed to be ancestors of ancient amphibians, which kind of shows that relationship once again between all the chordates. So when we talk about Osteichthyes, we're typically talking about subclass Actinopterygii. Now these are the fish you think about when you think about fish, right? Actin is a ray then, pteryx is a fin, so they don't have those muscular lobes like the previous fish we discussed do, but they do have a swim bladder. Now the swim bladder, it's just gas-filled sacs, it's along the dorsal wall, and when we dissect, you will be able to see this hopefully. and it helps regulate their buoyancy, whether they want to go up or down or where they want to travel in the water. So there's some different species we're going to get into. So group Chondrichthyes, now these only have 25 living species today. Their ancestral species had a boating skeleton, which is what groups them in the Actinopterygii, but their living members currently have a cartilaginous skeleton. Their tail also has a large upper lobe. So some examples of the Chondrichthyes are sturgeons. So these live in the sea, they migrate into rivers to breed. They do have bony plates covering the anterior end of their body, and these are the fish that are really valued for their eggs. So caviar is made from the eggs of these fish, and as a result, these fish are severely overfished, and their eggs are their source of reproduction, but their eggs are also harvested. So they're really struggling to keep their population numbers up. Another fish is the paddlefish. So these are large freshwater fish, and they have a long paddle-like rostrum, which is like their nose, and it has a lot of sensory organs, which picks up weak electrical fields. They're also filter feeders, and they're typically in lakes and rivers of the Mississippi River Basin. Actually, cool enough, the college I went to, our science building, we had this huge aquarium, and there was a paddlefish in that aquarium, which was pretty neat. So Neopterygii then are two primitive ones that live in the freshwaters of North America. So a garpike and then a dogfish or a bowfin. So the garpike is here, and then this is the example of the bowfin. So the Neopterygii are most other living fishes that are members of this group, and then within this group there are the teleost or the modern bony fishes. The number of teleost species actually exceeds 24,000 species of fish. And when you think of fish, these are what you think of. So let's get into it. So what is the largest successful vertebrate group? Simply put, fish. Fish are the largest successful vertebrate group. There are so many species, they inhabit so many areas, and they are very successful and have been for a very long time. So why are they so successful then? Well, they adapt to their environment. They adapt to their environment. They extract oxygen from very small amounts of oxygen per volume. They have very efficient locomotor structures, a high sensory system, and they have very efficient reproduction. So they produce lots and lots and lots of offspring. Now, obviously, not all of those offspring make it to adulthood, but that is a pretty high number of offspring, and that's why the fish populations, there's so many. The locomotion of fish is also largely in part due to their streamlined shape. So they have mucoid secretions that actually lubricate the body, which is kind of like a slime covering, and this is what decreases the friction between the fish and the water when they're moving. They also use their fins and body wall to push against the water. Now, if you look at this picture here, you can kind of see how they swim. They go this way, right? When you think about like a whale or a dolphin, they swim up and down with their tails. So fish are very side to side, very kind of S-shaped. And those muscles are what's providing the power for the swimming. So it's actually 80% of the fish is the muscles that they use for swimming. So those muscles, if we talk about them in a little more detail, so the trunk and tail are what propels the fish forward. Those muscles are arranged in zigzag bands called myomeres. They have the shape of a W when you're looking at the side of the fish. So you can kind of see, here's our W. You can see all those different muscles running down there. So this helps with those bands, and they help with that locomotion. So each myomere actually pulls on several vertebrae because the bands are internally kind of all woven together, and that really helps them move. When we talk about the nutrition and the digestion of fish, most fish are predators. They're going to eat invertebrates or vertebrates, and they actually swallow their prey whole. They don't chew it. A lot of them actually capture their prey via suction as well. So they close their opercula and then they rapidly open their mouth. Some species, as you know, are filter feeders. So they use things called gill rakers, and these actually trap the plankton while the fish is swimming. So they'll just swim with their mouth open, and that's how they get all those plankton in, and then the rakers are going to trap the plankton in their mouths. Some species are herbivores or omnivores, but like we said, most species of fish are predators. The circulation system of fish is also very different from ours. So their heart only has 2 chambers, and the fish heart only pumps blood in one direction. So we'll start here. So we'll start from the gills. They go into the body. The body then pumps it into the heart, which only has one of each, so the atria and the ventricle, which then pumps it back to the gills. So it's just a big circle. So the blood is going to enter and exit the heart through a vein, like we talked about, right? But it's moving to the gills, which is where the blood picks up the oxygen. So the oxygen that's coming in goes into the blood from the surrounding water, and it goes into arteries, which go to the body. The oxygen is used in the body, and then it goes back to the heart. So like we said, a very simple closed circulatory system. And you can see just another picture here. So one atrium, one ventricle, and that very simple circle. The gills then, since we're talking about gills and helping with the blood, the gills are actually composed of three very important structures. So first of all, the gill arch. The gill arch itself is the white part in this picture down here, and that's what gives the gills that rigid support that they need. The gill filaments, on the other hand, are always paired, and that is the red part of the structure that you see. And then the secondary lamellae, which is where the gas exchange takes place. Now, you can also see the gill rakers in this picture here. Obviously, it just depends on the form of the fish gills. So there's much larger ones over here versus smaller ones over there. So here's a closer look at just the gill arch and the gill filaments of a fish. And like I said, we'll be dissecting, so you'll see this as well. When we talk about then the gills with the blood, so the blood flows through the gill filaments and the secondary lamellae in the opposite direction. So the water's coming this way and the blood is going against it. This is really, really important to make sure that all of the oxygen possible is gotten from the water and goes into the blood. So the countercurrent exchange system then is just that very efficient method of gas exchange. So it maintains a concentration gradient, which you remember from bio, we talked a little bit about that in terms of solutions. So it keeps the concentration moving through. So it helps with the blood and the water, and this is actually over the entire length of the capillary bed. So it's very, very important for the fish to have a very efficient countercurrent exchange system. And here's just another picture that kind of shows the movement in the opposite directions. So on the other hand then, how do fish ventilate their gills? So they have to get water to pass over their gills. How do they do it? They do it two ways. They do something called ram ventilation, or they use a double pump system. So the ram ventilation is simply just they swim through the water with their mouth open, so they're ramming the water into their mouth, and this is how they get all that movement across their gills. Things that do this include great white sharks, mako sharks, salmon sharks, and tuna. So primarily more sharks, but there are some fish that do this as well. The double pump system, on the other hand, is how the water moves. So it's sucked in through the fish into the mouth cavity. It's going to go once, then it goes over the gills. And then as you see, there's expanding, and then we have contracting. So this is when the lips close. Then the lips are going to stay closed, and it pumps the water again through into the gill slit. Fish, believe it or not though, can actually suffocate. You might think, oh, well, they live in water, they're fine, right? Well, no. When they're taken out of water, they actually suffocate because their gill arches collapse and there's not enough surface area for the diffusion to take place. When they're in the water, as you know, right, when you swim, you kind of float, everything feels lighter. Same thing with fish. When you take them out of the water, gravity has a huge impact and their bodies can't support their gills to help them breathe. Some fish, though, like the lungfish we talked about, or the walking catfish, they can actually survive out of the water because they have modified lamellae allowing air breathing or lungs. Fish can also suffocate in water, which might be surprising to you, but this is when there's just not enough oxygen in the water. So if another source uses it up, or if there's an algae bloom or a red tide or bacteria is decomposing, those fish cannot get enough oxygen to survive, and then they also suffocate in the water. So when we talk about circulation and gas exchange, we're also talking about the swim bladders. So this is a sac inside the abdomen. It just contains gas, and it helps with the buoyancy of fish. It also helps them maintain their vertical position. So they're saturated with buoyant oils, especially in their liver, and they use their fins to provide lift. They also have a reduction of heavy tissue, so their bones aren't very dense, or they have a cartilaginous skeleton. And then, like we said, they have that swim bladder. The nervous and sensory functions. So fish have a brain and a spinal cord. They also have external nares, which are in the snouts of fish, and this leads to olfactory receptors. They also can return to streams. This is how they find out where they spawned. They have eyes,